So then we are back with a more understanding from the Renewed Covenant, from the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation is from the original documents of the Hebrews of old, from the time of Israel, from the prophets of Yahweh. So then we can understand the times of the end. And speaking of then the prophecy of the end related with the layer of the Gentiles, speaking of China and its relation with the world's market, we then understand that there is a system coming up, very handy, very friendly, where people can make investments, they can do banking, linked up with it. That's why the nations are going to be extremely busy for the next few years. However, we face ourselves time of election, and then the retrieval of our military from the world's waters, and also air, and also the land. Because we find then that the leading nation has a vast military in order to maintain peace and trade. So then, understanding from the viewpoint, our economy is not doing so nicely as it should be. So then we find ourselves then in an area where we should then try to save as much as we can. And in order for these to take place, then obviously a person would find ways of cut expenses, and then the expenses mostly related with the military because it's very expensive. So then, taking advantage of the emancipation of China, as we can read from the scripture in Revelation 8th chapter, is a simple understanding of a country taking over the world system in terms of the layer of the Gentiles' rulership, as the Messiah spent a couple of days with the Samaritans. So then we understand that 2,000 years from his time, he spent time with the Samaritans was 4031. He was born in 3999. This was found because of the big star in heaven was recorded, and then the computer was able then to find the eclipses near of this date where then the big star showed up. That's why we have then the calculation from 3999. He spent time 4031 with the Samaritans, giving them 2 days, meant they would have 2,000 years of rulership of their own. So it was. Rulership in the earth, secularly, 2,000 years. Per prophecy, ending ends at 6031. We take into consideration of the time of where the Messiah said he would then give his people a reduction of the time from 6031. Without the reduction, the maximum time the Gentiles have is 6031. That's the very maximum. Then you have to use another 490 days then to finish up the vengeance. But we understand the reduction is going to be, and we don't know for how long. However, we understand we are returning to the truth. We are leaving this seat, 1,000 years of this seat, rulership of Gentiles, they mixed with the church and junk and what they thought was heaven, when truly it isn't. So then we are returning to the truth. During the time of Yohanan, he was then living in the first city, replica of the city. So then the people after him, they would go around the world forming holy cities. And they gave directives to the world. So then we are returning to those areas where then the cities are going again to give directives to the nations as per their request. So then it's very important for us to understand how to make the tiny movements in this future of ours, and not overextend ourselves, not to make a big push to try to go around the world with our military, but then use the trade system of China. It's extremely important because they're going to take over it anyway. So then their emancipation of the military was for the purpose of maintaining peace around the globe via trade. So then they start take on patrols. And then we, in exchange of these, we retrieve. Because then we can save more money and invest in generation of new jobs. That's the heaven's plan for us. Yahweh is very smart. He knows what he does. But then we ourselves must be obedient and understand the plan. So as they begin then to shift their emancipation from their country and then evaluating then the Middle East, where it's at, more wars, then we request them patrols. So they begin to be more involved. As they begin to be more involved, then they begin then very slowly to retrieve. Because they want to enforce diplomatic trade. And for these has to have peace, no war. Why should we then, understanding our economical situation, we don't have enough manufacturing, why should we then be responsible for so many obligations and then we don't have any reason for it? Let the country with the very strong industry take on the responsibility of monitoring and then patrol the areas. And then plus, on top of this, we have then privatize. Our agencies must be privatized. There is no solution for then the reduction of our expenses without privatization. It's a factor of life. People must privatize. When a country is found in trouble, economical crisis, then they have to find private companies wanting to do this service, improving the service, reducing the costs, and then receiving a protocol of how they should run the agency. So then we become leaner and leaner without jeopardizing the services. But on the contrary, we would then improve the services while reducing expenses. It would be very unreasonable and very childish for the countries such as ours not have enough manufacturing, being in economical crisis. We are heavily indebted. And then what would be the reason for us to be around the world and then enforcing more military and then spending more money when it's not required? Truly, it's not required. As we understand, Israel is disobedient. As per the scripture, we understand then the court was then given to the Gentiles, meant part of the city is going to be theirs. Speaking of the Palestinians. So then we must be wise in not being involved with Israel's problems. It doesn't say that we should not help them monitoring Iran because of some sort of a nuclear weapon. We should be monitoring. But then we should not be involved of the point of going beyond our reason. Our reason states we can't be outside in the world for very long. We must retrieve for rebuilding. So then Israel, if they know or they don't know how to resolve their skirmishes, we should be then left out of it. Because it's costing us a lot. It's going to take a lot of work in our country to get back in shape. And we have this chance because China is having extremely strong military, so then they can start taking on the patrols. What Israel should be doing is making relationship with China and then developing their trade with China, so then China would extend their military in maintaining the peace in the region. But then Israel is trying to cling to us instead. What's the reason for it? There is no meaning for them to try to cling to us. We must retrieve from the world's scenario to rebuild. So then Israel picks a fight with Iran, then they want us to be involved with them. Since Israel is disobedient to what the Messiah told them to do, We should be making sure then, having this transitional time also for Israel to make a transition from being dependent on us and be dependent more upon China. Doing trade with China, so then the Palestinians have work to do. And during this time, then they request patrols in the area, and then there is a shift that goes on, and then Iran becomes more responsible. Because they could use also some trade. But then we are trying to launch our own ideas, crazy ideas of clinging to Israel for no reason. And then our economy is very fragile. Then we want to spend even more on the military. And then we want to enforce more our military around the world. We don't have the means of doing it. So it's a very shaky situation. Our country should encourage Israel to make friendship with China. It's the most important for us. It's not our fight. It's from Israel and Iran. We are not part of that fight over there. As long as Israel then becomes friend with China, then they can do trade, and then they help them enforce then the peace around the region. And then from Israel then extends throughout the Middle East. Then we can start delegating more authority and responsibility to the United Nations and then the Security Council over there, and then try to work through them, because then if we get involved with our military in the midst of it, then the economy drops. So the leadership of our country is somewhat not very smart when it comes to understanding then these areas of countries and the word in the scripture from the Aramaic or Hebraic understanding, the time of the end and the prophecies thereof. We're going to set up ourselves for trouble in the future if we do this. Because then more resources are going to be required, and then our economy can't handle it. We must encourage Israel to make friendship with China and then do trade, so then help the Palestinians. They can start up their own trade over there and then work in the land. And then from Israel then, if they are nicely obedient to those trade laws, then they can start earning. And then through these, then the military can back them up, because they are doing trade. And then from that extends throughout the Middle East. So then this vast, huge military of China then is put to use, without having us, the people, then bearing the expenses. Because then we start retrieving. And then privatization. That's the next step. Put every of those junky agencies, put them for sale. Make sure the private sector, they come in seriously and they do their work, and then lean it up. Then our country would go somewhere. Truly would, because then not having so much expenses around the world, it will be a great, huge savings. Plus then privatization of our agencies without jeopardizing their services. Then we would save even more. And then extraction of our own natural resources, then we would begin even more and then invest in our own infrastructure. But it has to be done as per logic. That's logic. A person must do by logic. How are we going to recuperate our economy if we are going to be more outside, more military around the world, more patrols, more military exercises, enticing war, and then not privatizing our agencies, how are we going to maintain ourselves? The whole plan, it lacks reality, it lacks sense in it, lacks logic. So what does the word then teaches us? In the 8th chapter of Revelation, it states of the third part of the ships. It speaks of trade. What is the most important country of the area? It's China. Why do they have a vast military to enforce trade? Do we have enough trade to back up our military around the world? No, we don't have any more economy to back them up. So the natural fact, per scripture, China has then the leadership and the military to enforce peace through trade. But then for some reason we want to do the contrary. We are having character of Israel, always disobedient. As Yahweh said, they are always a contrary people, always working against. But we are already experiencing then the consequences of our own disobedience. Our economy is nearly ruined. So then we should do what is logic. Logic. Arithmetic and logic. The logic stating we can't overdo anymore with our military, so then we retrieve. We let China then take some of the patrols and then let them do their trade. While we work on the high-end equipment and do more advertisement. And then for sure our agencies must go. We must lean up, as nice people as they are. The agencies must turn into private sector. So they become agencies of profit. So far they are parasites in the system. As nice as they are parasites. They are not producing. We must do what is logic. But then takes a stand. Takes a strong stand and do it. Our country would be another country by the end of the next 4 years if we begin to retrieve, save the money, invest in our infrastructure, creation of new jobs, then we extract our own petroleum, natural resources, then another moving forward, and then privatization. It would be a huge savings.